Tasmania's Premier Peter Gutwin has spoken for the first time about wrestling free from a teacher who sexually assaulted him when he was 16 years old. Key points: Mr. Gutwein was at a COVID briefing when asked about an incident that happened in question time yesterday. Mr. Gutwein was at a COVID briefing when asked about an incident that happened in question time yesterday. Government MPs were heard groaning after a question from a sexual abuse victim survivor was asked by the opposition leader. Government MPs were heard groaning after a question from a sexual abuse victim survivor was asked by the opposition leader. Mr. Gutwein today said the incident troubled him and went on to tell his own story of abuse at the hands of a teacher. Mr. Gutwein was speaking at the end of a COVID briefing on Friday outlining changes to mask rules. He was asked by a reporter about whether he would discipline members of his own party who were heard groaning during question time in response to a question about the state's upcoming commission of inquiry into child sexual abuse. The Labor opposition leader quoted a question from a Tasmanian victim survivor of child sexual abuse. Later, the victim survivor said they took offence at the reaction from the government benches yesterday. At the press conference this afternoon, Mr. Gutwein said he had trouble sleeping last night. "I must say last night this really troubled me, to have a victim survivor that felt this government was not being supportive," he said. He then said he was going to reveal something only once. "I am not going to speak about it again. I have great empathy with people who are victim survivors. I crossed the floor in 2002 to bring about a commission of inquiry that ultimately could have completely derailed my career," he said. "When I was a young man, when I was 16, I was the victim of a sexual assault. It was by a former teacher. I was asked to go to their home for a beer, which I thought was fantastic. I'd known this person for a long period of time. They'd spent a lot of time at the football club I was involved with. While I was there, they put their arm around me and they grabbed for my groin, tried to put their hand down my pants. I was big enough and strong enough to get them off me and get away." Mr. Gutwein said he had not spoken to anyone about the motivations about why I crossed the floor in 2002. He said he had reached out to the victim survivor, who took offence at the groaning of government MPs. "I hope they get in touch," he said. "I know what the loss of trust feels like. I know what the shame feels like. What happened in Parliament to spark this? M to mute, left and right arrows to seek, up and down arrows for volume. Watch 17 seconds 17s. Government MPs groan as Tasmanian opposition leader asks victim survivors question. Mr. Gutwein's revelation comes after Labor leader Rebecca White yesterday read out a question in Parliament on behalf of a victim survivor of notorious paedophile nurse James Jeffrey Griffin. Government frontbenchers were heard groaning and saying "come on" as Ms. White spoke. "The victim survivor, who watched you yesterday, said she saw you show no warmth, no empathy, or even mention the victims." Mr. Gutwein stood up later in Parliament to acknowledge his MPs had caused offence. "On behalf of the government, and without explanation or excuse, I wish to unreservedly apologise," he said. Peter Gutwin had apologised for the behaviour of government MPs during a question from a sexual assault survivor. Ms. White said the victim survivor wanted an apology from the MPs who had interjected. The Commission of Inquiry into the Tasmanian Government's responses to child sexual abuse in institutional settings is examining many allegations of abuse in state settings, including by Griffin. Griffin was a paediatric nurse at Launceston General Hospital for 19 years. He was charged in 2019 with child sexual abuse offences and took his own life. The Commission held its opening hearing on Tuesday, October 26 last year. It will recommence its hearings in May, with hearings to be held in Hobart and Launceston.